In the afternoon, between 4 and 5 o'clock, the great new ship Wasa capsized and sank in the channel close to Danviken. Nothing was left above water other than the cross trees on the main mast.
There were many in the city who witnessed the disaster. Later, wherever people met, on the streets, in the squares and in the taverns, the talk was of shock and fright. But words of scorn and mockery were also heard. Whose fault was it? Was there a curse on the ship? Or was it a punishment by God? Was she badly constructed? Was the disaster due to negligence? Perhaps the crew was drunk.
Σήκωσα από πίσω το... από πίσω. Κάτω.
At the royal palace, the king's counselors were shaken. 2 days after the disaster, they wrote a letter to the king, who was in Poland with his army.
Great and powerful king, omnipotent sire. When the ship reached the bay of Tepelviken, more weather came in the sails, and the ship went over to larboard, but came up again till it was off the island of Beckholmen, where it did completely fall on its side with water flowing in through the gun ports, until it did slowly sink with sails up and flags flying.
On September 5th, almost a month after the capsizing, Admiral Carl Carlson Gyllenhielm held a major inquiry at the royal palace. This was an important day, for the causes of the disaster were going to be clarified. Even more importantly, a culprit was going to be found. The fact that the shipbuilder, Master Henrik Hubertsson, was dead complicated matters. But 7 other men were summoned, and you will meet 3 of them here. We don't know what they look like, but the minutes of the inquiry have been preserved, and they tell us what the participants said. Arnd de Groot managed the affairs of the shipyard where the Wasa had been built. Perhaps he looked like this. The chief boatswain was Göran Mattsson. An experienced seaman, he dared say more than most. And young Lieutenant Petter Gjerdsson. What would this inquiry mean for his career in the Navy?
Lieutenant Petter Gjerdsson, you were responsible for the rigging, and you were on board when the ship set sail. Why didn't you say anything about the ship being so weak?
How was I to know? I was only in charge of sails and rigging. We had only set 2 topsails, foresail and mizzen. But I did notice that the ship heeled, even when the wind was so light that the sheets did not run through the blocks, although they were well tallowed.
Well then, Lieutenant Petter, what do you think made the ship capsize? Were the cannons properly secured?
My lord, the Vice Admiral ran below deck when the ship started to heel over. I was afraid that would be the last time I would see him. But he did come up on deck again and cried out that the cannons were secured. Petter
Gjerdson's testimony was true. when the ship was salvaged, the gun carriages were all lined up along the sides of the ship. The Wasa had 10 sails. We just heard she only had 4 set. The remaining 6 were found on board in the sail locker 3 centuries later.
Call the chief boatswain Göran Mattsson. Were you careless with the ship's ballast? Or why did His Majesty's vessel meet disaster?
I had taken on board as much ballast as there was room for, to get it exactly the way I wanted it. I went down myself with a lantern to stow the stones and get in as much as I could. I feel I have done what I should have done. The bottom of the ship was too narrow and she had no belly. I told Admiral Fleming this. He replied that the master surely had been ships before and that I was not to worry.
So, you noticed that the ship was tender.
I can only say that the captain of the Wasa had shown Admiral Fleming how weak the ship was. While the ship was docked below the Royal Palace, he had 30 men run from one side of the ship to the other in the presence of the Admiral. After they had run back and forth 3 times, the Admiral ordered them to stop. Had they continued, the ship would have overturned. To this, Admiral Fleming said, "If only His Majesty were at home."
This was important testimony. Admiral Claes Fleming, the strong man of the Navy and confidant of the King. Why dared he not do anything after the ominous stability test? We know that the King was pushing hard to get his ship under sail. Much was at stake.
Please call Arne de Groot from the shipyard. Why was the ship so poorly built?
The ship was as well built as any ship could be.
Then why did it capsize?
Only God knows. The ship was built according to those specifications that we and His Majesty had agreed upon. You could, my lord, ask any shipbuilder to look at it and they would say that it was incontestably well built.
The ship may have been well built, but it was ill-proportioned.
The men who built the Wasa were skilled craftsmen. But no shipbuilder in Sweden had any experience in building a ship with 2 gun decks. The Wasa needed more ballast, but there was not enough room for the stones. The King gave orders, and then counter-orders while the ship was under construction. He wanted to arm her with more and heavier cannon than usual. Now, what happened after the inquiry into the capsizing of the Wasa? Who was blamed? Well, no one was convicted.